Hi everyone, welcome back to 2 Plus. I'm doing a battle report on a 1500 point game I played as High Elves against Michael's Empire. Michael's the tournament organizer for both the tournament that we've been talking about a lot on this channel, the 1500 point tournament that we ran or that we played in a few months ago, and also the next one, which is a similar format, but we'll have a little bit more of an emphasis on ranked infantry in the scenarios. I played Lizardmen at that last tournament and have been looking forward to playing something different. It'll be high elves for sure. And I'd started to think that I needed to run a dragon to be able to compete because I still play to win when I play, not necessarily to squeeze the life out of a list. I still want to have a game. But at the same time, like in a tournament, I want to play as well as I can and sort of enter a contest, I suppose. So this tournament report looks at the start of a list that I've been putting together based around a Skycutter mage. If you weren't aware of what's possible for the High Elves, so to run through the list, I'll just give you Michael's list and then sort of explain some of the choices that I have. From the top, he's got a steam tank on the left. He has a unit of 28 halberdiers that has a battle standard bearer who has the dragon bow and a charm shield, as well as full plate armor. On this side, he has a level 4 wizard running demonology, the ruby ring. Next to that, he's got a law familiar, sorry. Nothing else on this big block of halberdiers. He's got a general on the Griffon who's wearing the white cloak, has a sword of might. 5 knights with a preceptor, a champion, and a musician who are drilled. A little bit of an issue with the photo here. Sorry, I had to take 3 shots of the flanks, and there's a little bit of overlap on this hill that I can't blend out at the moment. But there's 10 crossbowmen. Then there's 2 demigriffs, vanilla, no other upgrades, and a great cannon on the right-hand side. So we're playing this first scenario, which involves controlling this feature in the middle, which is a wood. I've played this a couple of times now, and it's quite open because of forest, which I think I tend to do okay with. But being able to charge through the feature rather than be blocked by it does create some interesting situations. So for me, what I'm running is an army with a level 4 Archmage who takes illusion. And the Lord Familiar, as well as the White Sword. The White Sword, outside of High Elf aficionados, is probably not very well known, but ultimately gives you +3 strength, -2 AP, and has Monster Slayer. However, it's a two-handed weapon that requires you strike last. What is interesting about it is that you cast spells in combat at initiative order. So if you're charging with an Archmage who has initiative 5, +1 for Elven reflexes, and +3 for the charge, you can cast that Spectral Doppelganger at initiative 9 and get it off, or if it resolves, and strike essentially first at initiative 9. Instead of the weapon making you strike last happens when the normal attack kicks in from the Archmage. So bit funky in the way the rules work, but also comes in about 375 points on a Skycutter. So the weapon can only be taken by a unit, or can't be taken by a character on a ridden monster. So interestingly, the chariot has its strengths and weaknesses. So chariot itself doesn't get killing blowed or monster slayed, and that can be an advantage. By putting an Archmage with 3 wounds on the chariot, it goes up to 7 wounds. Sad, but it's not a large target, so it can sort of be obscured from missile fire. But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to put a lot of protection there. So you've got a 4+ armor save, and that's it. You've got your 7 wounds, and it means that given that you want to get into combat, there are some difficult choices to make in how aggressive you need to be, because you're not invulnerable. And on top of that, part of the place of level 4s in this format is to be able to dispel. And we'll look at that in greater detail in this video and the tactics videos that spring out of that. But it can be difficult to manage the need to dispel, but also that the whole army is sort of built around this unit. That said, it's a 375 point unit that can take down 500 point units. And I've been pretty impressed with the redundancy the weapon gives you with strength and AP. Reducing sword means that you aren't just looking at that do or die Dragon Slayer roll where you need a 6 and for that not to be saved by the ward to pop that big character. So it's pretty useful across the board. To the right of that, I'm carrying like a Griffon, a noble Griffon riding battle standard bearer, has Pure of Heart, and carries Dragon Helm. So with full plate armor, shield, Dragon Helm, you're getting a 2+ armor save. I use the Opal Amulet. The Opal Amulet, the High Elves have an embarrassment of riches with ward saves and regeneration saves. I like the Opal Amulet. Essentially, it defends against multiple wounds attacks with a 1-off 2+ save. I wasn't carrying the War Banner in this game. That's probably one of the takeaways we'll talk about later, but this is a great piece that has a lot of roles in the army. Ultimately, it's a Griffon is great value for 130 points by itself, but on top of that, I have a Handmaiden General. So when we get to this, you need the Pure of Heart function, which is free to operate Leadership 9, Battle Standard Bearer, large target. It anchors the entire army and keeps units on the board. So ultimately, that's a lot of points. You have to run a Handmaiden General if you want Sisters of Avalon at core. So in this, before we get to that, which I think is one of the better ways to build high elves, especially at the lower points limit, the Handmaiden General, everybody, well, not everybody, but there's some talk of whether Horn of Isha is worth it or not. I sort of don't think it is. It's great when you get it off, but the points are very tight in this list. And the Handmaiden General itself is a bit of a meme. It just sort of sits in the unit with its glorified ballistic skill, which is somehow ballistic skill 7, which seems to be somehow worse than ballistic skill 5 in odds. But that's a personal cross I've got to bear with the silly modifying rules. We'll get to that in other videos. You've already seen the first video where I can't believe that -2 to hit doesn't equal a 2+ to roll and says 4+, 5+. However, I've got to move on. And in this sense, if you're looking at that general, you don't get a lot of that. Horn of Isha, if you fail, it's not going to do a lot, but you're generally just trying to roll 6s on those hits. And it's the fact that so many of the sisters can hit. You want those natural 6s that come in at AP -3. So we'll have a look at that throughout this video because the Sisters of Avalon are incredible and have a whole raft of special rules which make them extreme value for their points. But the 3 characters are the Illusion Archmage, Spectral Doppelganger Whitesword, the Griffon, who's a bit of a tank and pins their army together, and the Handmaiden General, which enables you to take these sisters in core. At the moment, I'm just running a list with the 12 that I own, and we'll probably paint up more later on to see how they go. But high off core is surprisingly not as good as people might think. Your options are toughness 3 is just such a liability that you've got to look at whether what you're taking as expensive troops. So if you're taking spearmen or archers, reavers, silverhelm, seaguard, they all tend to die in great droves, and it's hard to have a lot of them around without greater sort of defensive potential. So in this case, these sisters being skirmishers, which are already the rules seem to favor in this edition, -1 to hit, but they're highly mobile, which just makes them harder to target. But ballistic skill 5, the arrows of Isha on top of Bow of Avalon, meaning that you're getting AP -1, AB or AB2 on those 6s. You can really take down nearly anything with that sort of mass firepower because the ballistic skill 5 ignoring cover, you're often pretty much rolling on 3s all the time. You can form them up in a way where they only really need the barest line of sight to a target because they're not taking that cover penalty where they're obscured by the model in front of them. So you can take these quite large units of them because they can almost rank up behind one another. In this game, I've just formed them up as close as possible. They are in skirmish formation, which is another video I might run, given my experiences with skinks, that you're not forced to run them 1 inch apart, and in many cases to limit the ability for everybody to shoot at the same target with a large range of surface area to start from. You should probably keep them as close together as possible when they're shooting long distances. So in this instance, they're sitting in a skirmish formation, but close together, and the Handmaiden is in that unit. I'm also running 2, in this game, I ran Eagle claw bolt throwers on the Sloth and Skycutters. I wanted to run those just to see what they were like because I had the points. I'm pretty much running the models that I have as I paint up some of the other options. But I ran two with the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, so 115 points each. But the base 90 points for a chariot that has Fly 10, Swift Stride, D3 plus 1, Strength 5 impact hits is a pretty big deal. So they are high off players. So talk about them being better than Dragon Princes, better than Silverhelms, better than the Lion Chariot, which doesn't have Swift Stride. So they're fascinating and definitely worth the points. I think you'll see throughout this game that for what they cost, they do get around and do a lot of work. So that's the backbone of what I'm trying to do in terms of where the damage comes from. In this game, I'm also I tried to run 7 Swordmasters. You can see in the bottom right in drilled formation, I had these sort of points left over. Again, all I have army where it's what I've painted up, and I've got a lot of Swordmasters painted. I was trying to find a use for them, thinking I could drill into 7 wide supporting attack formation. I do have a champion in that unit, but you'll see they don't do particularly well. I'm running this Archer Dart here, which is probably the wrong approach in hindsight. So they could be a marching column, 5 archers. They might need to act more as screeners if I take them, but they're there for the cheap option. Really, you can take 5 spearmen for 45 points, but the 5 archers, it's not a lot. 5 more points to get 5 extra shots out of them, or longbow shots, which aren't so bad. 30-inch range, armor bane 1. I'm also running 5 Reavers. I had the full boat on these guys just to see what would be good. I had short bows, I had them in skirmish formation, I had them in with scouting as well. So I have a Harbinger here. The Harbinger's got 2 attacks and ballistic skill 5. I didn't have the musician because I couldn't find the points in the end, but I was just trying to see if the Reavers are better than the archers. They're double the points, but scouting and skirmishing are big deals in this format, and I wanted to see how that went. I'm also running a lone eagle, interestingly. And so the function of this eagle, which I think I misplayed, is to provide some redundancy. We'll get to how that works with this army, but ultimately your biggest threat to the spectral doppelganger is your opponent being able to dispel it. And that's important. So if you can tie down the wizard, which we'll get to in combat, then it's not going to be able to do that. So here I probably should have anchored it in the middle. I got caught out in deployment a bit and was using it on this right side to hunt this cannon. And we'll see how that works out in the game. But that's the list at the moment. We'll get through the game, look at some of the things that occurred, and then I'll look at the takeaways I have at the end and how I might be improving this towards the tournament that I'm going to be playing in about a month or 5 weeks' time. All right, so from the outset, I didn't get to go first, which is an unusual thing for me. I've been going first a lot with Lizardmen who tend to win deployment, and it's made me appreciate the significant edge you get in that ability to go first, even with the roll. So in this case, Michael finished deploying first, got the +1. We tied. He won the roll off again. But as you've seen in some of the battle reports I've played, his demigriffs charged my Reavers and my Reavers fled. I'd set them up very much specifically so that they wouldn't run off the board if they were charged by the demigriffs, so that the angle would lead me backwards rather than more towards the board edge. It's this, I don't know if I'll do a tactics video on this time around, but that ability, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't with some of these units on the wing. So if he charges and connects, makes a long charge, he's then at the mercy of my Skycutter or other units from my, I guess, deployment without the support of other units on his side. And that's something I'm finding happens a lot in games, that these forward units get in the way. And if he decides not to charge them, then they just sort of loom not far from his face, really. Like, so if I can put them right up, on the next turn, I can just march straight past them and get out of their charge arc. So it's an interesting area of skill that I want to get better at in the game. But in that first turn, your scouts, in the ability of the game, in the first few turns of the game, can stand there, flee from a charge, and draw out bigger units who then have failed to charge and haven't moved forward as far as they might like, Or if the opponent avoids their temptation, which not many of my opponents have been able to do so far, they can then march past next turn and get into the back, what people call the back lines or the backfield in Warhammer, and start to cause problems from behind units that won't be able to charge them and get them off the board. So yeah, straight away my Reavers are fleeing and get out of there. I'm not sure if particularly a lot more happened on that first turn from Michael. He got some shots off his steam tank, took a wound. His cannon didn't hit my chariot, my Skycutter's chariot, which was good. Being able to wear that first one. No engineer on the Empire side really like winds back some of the consistency of the cannons. I'm a huge fan of great cannons. They have enormous range. D3 plus 1 wounds is a big deal. But yeah, I was very lucky in that first turn to not have to take a great amount of damage. My archers were ruby ringed. I lost 4 out of the 5 archers, which meant I didn't really get to see how they'll go in this game. But the crossbowmen, who also shot at the Reavers, I managed to actually roll 2 sixes to save the 2 wounds that were done. So my first turn was a bit of a mess in terms of movement, and probably later on, it'd be good to talk about some of Warhammer and some of this stuff that happens with movement that just, I don't know, doesn't feel like Warhammer the way it sort of resolves itself. I think rules changes should be made not just for balance reasons, but for play accessibility reasons. And this picture sort of shows a bit of the mess that we ended up in the first turn. So you can see that my Reavers had ended up back, they'd rallied and gotten into just gone straight back at it, which is the plan. I think they've got enough runway to get away from it. I'd sort of measured again for the demigriffs that if the demigriffs charge them, that I probably can outrun them. The eagle had decided to go straight at this cannon. It might be too close, and it's going to take a grape shot in the next turn, but I wanted to get outside the arc of the demigriffs. Maybe it was good to just have them have it over the side, but I was worried about redirection. The Skycutter just had to come forward and take some risks and has ended up angled in a way that it's going to be able to hit one of these units if it likes next turn, but it's sort of come into contact of the arc of those crossbowmen. My Griffon charged the knights straight out. I did think, what happens if he tries to flee with the knights? Does it bait my Griffon out into a bad charge? But I was pretty confident, to tell you the truth, that the Griffon, and this is a big sort of function in the metagame, but these battle standard bearer Griffons or mobile battle standard bearers can add, with close order, can add a lot of res to these combats and sort of hold their own, that they're going to fall back in good order and not so much just get destroyed in combat. I've been pretty confident in playing this for a while now, that even if it got attacked or failed its charge, that it wouldn't be destroyed on that first turn. So yeah, the Griffon's gone straight out, aiming to then block this line towards the chariot as well. So because it's a large target, the Griffon shouldn't be able to slip through, and there isn't enough space there for it to hit it in the front. The Swordmasters have maneuvered around to look to get a charge next turn, and so is the Skycutter Mage, who I feel like I have to be aggressive with and just come forward. I've managed to pull off, the camera doesn't show it quite well, but Glittering Robe, which is surprisingly good in this game. The -1 to hit is excellent against ballistic skill shooting, but also just in terms of it being a squishier combat piece than you're used to, being able to survive that first round of combat. So although you're hitting against the Archmage, who only has weapon skill 4, being able to reduce 3 pluses to 4 pluses to hit can help a great deal in being able to hang on in combat if it gets charged. So yeah, what happens, I suppose, as you can see on the right-hand side, that the flank that was more congested from deployment, I had a pretty much open left flank, but you can see that that's really, the sisters have just gotten onto a hill. The Skycutter on the left has been able to just move up and get a front-facing arc onto anything it would like to charge the next turn. Its mobility is incredible, and came away thinking that the 20-inch march range is really its best feature in terms of being able to out distance all other units that it could be vulnerable to. Here, their sisters just jump onto the hill, allowing them all to have line of sight. And between the ruby ring and the sister shooting, I think I took down about 6, maybe 8 halberdiers getting a panic test, even though they're immune to panic because they have the battle standard bearer from Empire. in their front rank. Beyond that, on the right-hand side, you see that I've come right up and I'm much more vulnerable to attack, but you'll see that ultimately I just end up fleeing from both those units anyway. The sisters get a great look here. I suppose how amazing they are. They take down so many units just with their mass amount of shooting. So hitting on 3s, 4+ to wound, but really reducing any armor possible. They get that line of sight on Michael's Empire units that had steered shadowed straight up into the feature, the contested feature. I'd been able to cast Miasmic Mirage 2 from the Chariot Rider onto that unit, so it wasn't getting out of charge later. Potentially, I probably should have gone after the general, but I felt like I wanted the general to attack and to charge because I felt like both my mage and the Griffon had a good chance against it. We had an interesting scenario here. It had come up in a couple of games that we've had so far where the Griffon clearly can see the flank of my Griffon. However, it's in the front arc of the Griffon. Doesn't mean it can't charge at all. So I tend to think that the game rules should reward the attacker. I grew up playing older editions of Warhammer where it was almost explicitly stated that that's how the game was designed. In this instance, Michael's argument was, if there's no legal charge, is it allowed to charge at all? I tend to think if it can't enter the front rank but can see the flank, then that's a legal charge. And just because a certain version of the wording of the rules sort of implies that if you can't charge into the front, then there's no, you can't charge at all. I'd be interested in what people think. I think it's ridiculous, like the Ballistic Skill 7 argument, that you should be at the characters with Ballistic Skill 6 and 6+ are actually worse off with some of their rerolls than units that with a lower ballistic skill. In this instance, ridiculous that the Griffon couldn't charge the flank here, in my mind. But just interested in how this is being played around the world because it had ramifications. What ends up happening in this combat is that I win, I only kill one knight, win, but the knights only give ground. So I have to think about whether I should be a sitting duck to be charged by both these units next turn or follow up on my charge, because although Michael's knights have been able to countercharge here, again, pretty confident in the tankiness of the Griffon. It hadn't lost combat, but it would lose that charging bonus next turn, have to give up lances on the other side to continue to block the line of sight to Skycutter. So I ended up following up, and that's where it was at. So for Michael's next turn, he's able to charge in, but on this right flank, you might see I've just charged it again. I've fled again with Skycutter and the Reavers. And we had some interesting scenarios where Michael did some redirection. So his Demigriffs initially declared a charge on the Reavers, and the General declared an attack on the Skycutter. And I fled with both. And in fleeing, even though I passed the terror test, Michael attempted some redirects, was able to pass, and there was some confusion around, well, in what order did things happen? Because then the direction of the flee had to be redone. So I think the way it works is if you choose to flee automatically, you flee straight away. Obviously, if multiple charges occur, then you flee away from the highest unit strength. But in this case, because there were two separate charges, I fled in the right direction. And it was interesting, like, how tactical fleeing can be, because my Skycutter's massive flee arrangement, I was able to pop over the back of the Swordmasters to safety, which, given that you can then just rally and march again, something to me, it just doesn't feel much like Warhammer. There's a lot, I think, to do with tactical fleeing in the first couple of turns, where you can change the nature of the boardscape drastically with these high mobility units. So to get to the crux of it, what Michael was able to do was to get that Griffon with the give ground in the middle from my Griffon and his knights. He then had a lane in which the Griffon was able to come over the top and charge my Archmage, interestingly enough. You can see the Skycutter has popped over the back of the Swordmasters, and this combat continues here. his halberdiers who are unable to march or charge because they've got mirage on them go further into the forest feature, but his demigriffs are still sort of stuck moving forward on the right hand side. I had this eagle lined up against the cannon. It has to try to eat a grape shot. Probably didn't play the eagle that well in this game. I sort of took my chances here, but ended up taking 4 wounds. And I think there's a high probability that it would die in these instances, and I should have probably thought to go a different way. However, that cannon is a great problem for me, even though the 2 main targets were in combat. In this turn, any turn where the cannon's not shooting at my major pieces is a big win. So for 60 points, probably not a bad loss of points because that turn 2 is so critical. But I think I've got to get better at playing the eagle, and I might have been able to do something different, which will become obvious in the next couple of slides. In the next image, you can see, I think I'm just sort of showing that later on, what I can tell you is that this Skycutter mage is just able to rally and then move back. And I think that incredible mobility is something you have to take advantage of with these highly fragile elf armies, where you're able to just flee, and then you've got when the BSB particularly is around and you can re-roll rally tests, you've got rallying cry from a couple of different from the Sea Guard Archmage as well. It's a huge issue to be able to just quickly run away. Other units move there not very far, and then you're able to not just rally but then march if you're far away from other units. It's an incredible amount of flexibility. But to get to the big combat, what happens here is that interestingly, so initially the Skycutter mage survives the first hit from the Griffon, and I guess that's just what combats are. It's so many of automatic hits just make a big deal, and the Griffon has stomps, but you can just whiff when you're rolling to hit, rolling to wound. You've got armor saves. There's so many, I guess every step along the way is less probability of wounding. And a lot of combats just don't have many wounds when you don't have these things geared towards making the dice in your favor so great. So in that first combat, I'm able to push back with I win and uncouple here, and the general gives ground. And I've passed a lot of leadership tests in this game, and are able to hang on and restrain and reform, so that I can then potentially charge the general again or go after that big unit of infantry with my Skycutter mage. What I did get, incredibly Valor of Ages, I should have said, used twice, where I took heavy casualties on an archer unit, heavy casualties on the Swordmaster unit from missile fire, and had to re-roll using Valor of Ages, the panic test, and I passed after failing, I just thought that was a throwaway rule, but incredibly, it is re-rolling high leadership tests is almost an auto pass. I think you're up in the 90% probability. But yeah, what happens in this turn is I'm able to rebuff, and the Griffon also was able to on its combat, restrain and reform and not go after the knights. So what ends up happening in that second slide is on my turn, and I think this is the key play for people who are worried about the effect of magic in this metagame. The Skycutter mage works with high elves a little bit better because you get the white sword, which has a lot of redundancy. So it's got +3 strength, -2 AP. So you're not just swinging for 6s. It can do a lot of damage on its own. But you get the reroll. I think it's not the Blessing of Lilith. And so you're going to get 2 chances to get the spell off for starters. So if you're not risking that failure that you might with other armies, you've got a great chance of rolling a successful, I think you got to roll a 6 once. Then on top of that, here, the role of the Griffon, and to that sense, why I got to take an eagle as well, is to tie down the opposing level 4. What the opposing level 4 is able to do is to tie up this wizard. So the wizard is able to go in and hit the opposing level 4, stop it from dispelling. And what happens, that's what happens in the next turn. So I'm able to get, even though I got Spectral Doppelganger off, the no chance of dispelling means I roll high. I think I rolled 6 hits, strength 6, and one of those was a 6, and Michael wasn't able to save his ward. But I probably would have done 4 wounds at least anyway, I think. And won combat by a long way. So it was a highly successful run for the Spectral Doppelganger Mage. First time pops the General. The Griffin's gone in to tie down the Wizard to make that happen, and the Swordmasters here had entered that combat. But for the second game in a row with the Swordmasters, they haven't swung a blade in anger, really. So interesting move. It'll go down in more detail in another video. So what happens next is I was shocked at the ability of the Griffon to take down this unit. So I'm running into a Griffon with a BS, running into an Empire unit with a Battle Standard Bearer, a Banner, and a Mage on that right side that I've managed to lock down. I probably am doing my Serrated more attacks against the Mage, but otherwise going against the unit. So I've got the 3 attacks from the Noble who gets to, the Noble gets to strike first. I've got the Griffin's 3 other attacks and its D3 stomp attacks. And I just kept taking models off the board and being able to win with the res, having close order, and the battle standard on top gave me enough of a buffer that I continually was winning combat with the Griffin and pushing them back. And in the second side, you can see in this video that the Sky Cutter is looming in the background. It's managed to swing around the back on that second turn, and then in the third turn hits the halberdiers and forces the fallback in good order. It was a fascinating way to look at, I guess, these swarming combats. That the size of units, people are really worried about what's the relevance of infantry. Well, these massive units are very hard to kill. So, like, we will post Michael's list, but an Empire BSB is 100 points. It's not a lot. Its Sorcerer isn't much either. And then I'm not sure what 28 halberdiers are, but I don't think they'd be over 200 points. And I'm throwing in my 300-point Elf Lord, a 90-point Sky Cutter. It's roughly equivalent, but while it felt like I was killing a lot of things, it did tie up my Griffin too for a significant part of the game. And look, that's a cost I was willing to take. But there were lots of different times where this could have gone either way. And it was interesting to see the effect that fallback in good order has and not fleeing in this format. Because of just the large numbers of units, it would continually, Michael would continually pass his leadership test, even though he would fail his break test. He would pass his break test and fail the modified leadership test. So I'd continue to push back, and even the fallback in good order, I'd follow up, but I just couldn't. To get the points, you've got to actually kill all the models in the unit, and it takes a lot of time. So it probably takes the rest of the game here, even though that third turn combat is decisive, and I win and create the pushback with the Sky Cutter. Peril test isn't much to be able to flee through and get to the other side. Doesn't do the type of damage that it used to in previous editions. And if infantry can be reimagined as an anvil, which I think is reasonable, I think like Chaos Alex said in our last video on what the role of infantry might be in this format is they've moved more away from Death Stars to become bunkers, and those bunkers provide protection for characters. And those characters might get tied up, but at the same time, they can last a lot longer than you might think at the moment. Anyway, the Illusion Mage continued to go on, ripped into the demis and smashed them as well. So with the Mage tied up, Spectral Doppelganger just went out of control. I was able to continually get off Glittering Robe. So picked up the points from the General, picked up the Demigriffs on the follow-through, and just made mincemeat of them with the Doppelganger. I think I did about 6 wounds. I rolled higher, maybe 9. This time hit strength 6, the minus AP2, or AP -2, did a lot of damage. So that's where the Archmage ends up. Unfortunately, he did have to wear some damage on the way through. It had taken 1 wound early in the game from the Dragon Bow. The Griffin rider had landed a few hits on it in that first combat before I had recharged it after restraining and reforming. And then the cannon, I think, might have ended up doing the 4 wounds to clean it up. And the Great Cannon's just incredible. And yeah, that stretch between 2 to 4 wounds is really terrifying, especially for these heavy chariots. That 4 wounds is great, but they can be taken clean off in 1 hit. So those extra wounds provided by the Archmage, unfortunately, had taken the attrition. And it's something I've got to think about in this format, that the Archmage is phenomenal, but probably because of its need to be aggressive, is going to die in a lot of these games, and I've got to think about how I might preserve points to actually win as well. So in that vein, the Reavers and the Archer, they just end up running and sitting behind a hill. So that's 160 points I was able to save. I did have to give up 25% of the points, but that one Archer, just after on the first turn, Michael killing 4 out of the 5, me re-rolling my Valor of Ages and surviving, I just ended up marching as a skirmisher behind a hill and saving 40 points or so in the game. So that's an interesting tactic in this format, and we'll talk about at the end my feelings about that. But the Reavers too fled twice, thought about coming out from the side of the hill, but the crossbowmen were sort of around for most of this game in the steam tank. So I just ended up standing here until the end of the game, and I felt like that was sort of a C plus performance from them. So who knows whether the archers are better at this stage. That was sort of the takeaway I've come away from the list, that mostly settled on the rare / special and character points, but how I spend the core on those auxiliary troops will be the next step, and I'm still undecided. So to look at this is sort of how the Sky Cutters fared after this and the maneuvering. So that unfortunately can't really orient this image for the best, but on the left you can see that that Sky Cutter has swung around after finishing off the unit in the middle, and this unit, the other Sky Cutter that had fled on the right flank, has re-established itself in the middle. Those two, they can then draw a line of sight to the cannons and the crossbowmen. And what happens is they both are able to combo charge the crossbowmen. So that Sky Cutter in the center had taken 3 wounds from a cannon shot. Incredibly, it was able to weather the stand and shoot from the crossbowman with its 4+ armor save. Michael was unlucky. He rolled a lot of hits, wasn't able to wound much, and couldn't get through that AB modifier on the armor. So I was able to get in with both. I feel like one was probably going to be enough anyway, but both were able to smash them and then survive. And even then, from here, the Sky Cutters, one is not over the hill yet, but is able to then hide behind the hill, and the other one makes it into the chariot again into the cannon, which misfired or wasn't able to hit it on the last turn. So overall, for 90 points, the Sky Cutters did a great job, and they're certainly, in terms of, although we're playing at 1,500 points, we've got to be a lot tighter. And with Dragon Princes so far, I felt like they were pretty good. They're half the price for a basic unit of Dragon Princes, have a longer threat range, aren't impetuous, probably don't have the flexibility Dragon Princes have, but by far and away the most efficient hammer unit that you're using to bulk out the middle of the very brutal high off army otherwise. So the Griffon continued to do great work and pushed back this unit. Actually lost the last combat as I was trying to push it off the edge and gave ground. But eventually drove down the unit. As I was saying in earlier slides, had to keep killing rank and file to get all those points, which is what I was able to do. And in the final combat, the mage was driven off the board, but spent the entire game whittling them down. It was fascinating, where I thought this was a B+, maybe A game from the Griffon overall, but ultimately spent its entire game on that one unit. So probably its ability to tie down the mage was match winning, and I'll take it. But it is interesting, fallback in good order, how it changes the game. And I think it does make the game better in some ways, but it creates really unpredictable situations. And there are some other rules, I suppose, that are anchored on that I'm not sure are playable at the moment, like in the way that in pursuing units, you sort of trip over each other and create some blocking situations. And the whole notion of fleeing through units has been taken too far. Like you're not rewarded for following up there. You can often get blocked while a unit that you just beat by 8 runs away and reforms. It just doesn't feel like Warhammer at the moment. You can see how the chariots ended up. I was able to beat the cannon on the right and then steer clear. The Sky Cutter on the right is really off the board. So it was interesting how I was able to win and then hide from the steam tank cannon that might have been able to nab a few points from its central position at the end of the game. This was sort of the end game maneuver, which in this tournament, we're getting benefits from ranked infantry. occupying certain parts of the board. The sisters were able to slowly just move and shoot, move and shoot, move and shoot back towards the center of the board. The steam tank had taken, I think, up to 4 wounds on itself for its temperamental ability throughout the game. And the sisters added about 3 more. But on the final turn, so in the turn before, they were able to step into the forest. And then on the final turn, reform. So they would have 1 rank and gain the 3 battle points that are on offer in this tournament if you can do that. So that's how it sort of ended up. I didn't get a shot of the board at the end, but the Griffon was hiding behind a hill. The one sky cutter was behind another hill. Sorry, I should say the Griffon was behind a house. One was off the board on Michael's last turn, and the sisters had got into the forest. So I think Michael got about 550 points, and I must have got close to 1,300, given the steam tank was still alive, but I'd won his general and a few other banners, maybe even 1,400, and the battle points for 1,700. So it would have been a big win in a tournament. I'm grateful to Michael for giving me a run through. He hadn't come across the Skycutter Mage before. It's certainly, if you're watching, what I'm looking to take to the event. I think it was fun enough that and playable enough that it would be better than a dragon. I guess at 1,500, dragon might be a bit on the nose, especially that the sun dragon and moon dragons I don't think are great value for points at that level, and it'd have to be an archmage and a star dragon, but I don't really know if that's the way I want to go. So I was pretty happy with the Skycutter Mage being a fun alternative to that. My takeaways from the game is just the power of tactical fleeing on the first turn and setting up to be able to flee as I described in those slides. As I said, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think understanding threat ranges is a key skill in the game, and those units can be positioned early on to either force your opponent into some inefficient movement that's like essentially stupidity in the first couple of turns without, I suppose, being at the risk of being charged back. But if they won't charge you, then you can slip past into the back lines. So a lot of those units. So I put a high premium on scouting and skirmishing. But in High Elves, unfortunately, I'm used to playing Skinks where that's quite cheap. For High Elves, I think looking at Reavers, which cost double the points of your minimum archers, who are already expensive model for model. So got a few lists where I look at those auxiliary troops, whether archers, eagles, reavers, or shadow warriors even are the best units to run at the lower points levels, and we'll see how that goes. Something which will be the basis of another video is just this. People complain about Magic. I don't know whether dragons or level 4 are more ubiquitous, and with the recent results at the London GT, where some didn't even take level 4s, but dragons were soundly beaten by Bretonians everywhere. It's interesting to think how you might counter Magic, and I think it's become a case of dancing around that 24-inch dispel bubble, and that you're taking that level 4 for dispelling, and I've found in some of my games, probably due to my own poor play, haven't been able to keep that bubble going. So in this game, the strategy is to tie down the opposing level 4, and so you can get the doppelganger through without any, they can try a faded, but you're probably rolling very high with your own level 4 and the high spell casting cost of spectral doppelganger. So it's often going off on 13 or 14 and then needing to roll double 6 to stop you on the faded. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at playing the game, that really that eagle is going to be there, and you can have up to 2 eagles, but that's again premium points that might cost you an extra. I am looking at an extra unit of 9 Sisters of the Thorn I can squeeze in to the rare because they are very powerful. But the eagles itself, there to run into the mage, and yep, it dies, but as long as for 1 turn it's not allowing the dispel, because if you've charged, you're getting to choose the order of the combat, and you'll run your doppelganger first. Initiative 9 goes off. In the game tonight, the Griffon was able to do that and just head in and hold it down. That was the intention, that if I had lost that Griffon and I'd killed the general, I would have considered that a good trade. So the strategy here, being able to just tie up the opposing level 4, I do feel like one of the strong grounds for looking at very high level competitive play is turn order, and beyond that, even the different way the game plays in turn 1, turn 2, through to turn 6. So I know for starters, going first is great on the first turn, but going last is great on the sixth turn. And being able to control that last turn of charges, if you make it that far, can also be a decisive advantage in the way tournaments and the tournament game is run. So one of the things you can do is spells on the first, second turn, third turn can have a bigger impact or be more important. So, if someone's casting Arcane Urgency on the first turn, where you're usually more than 24 inches away, technically, then you winning that first turn and getting that Arcane Urgency off can be great. Or casting your pillars and getting out of the way can be great. On the second turn, some of those big combat power spells come into play as well, where the charge-based spells or vortexes that might get in the way. Being able to use a dispel scroll or go in and get the wizard blocked up who's doing the dispelling is just as powerful, because that's the reason why you got to run a level 4. So that'll be something that we have been looked at in an earlier video, but I think is something worth looking at, about how much is it costing you to tie down that level 4, because it's costing you 50 points and it costs them usually around 200 points to get theirs. That's a lot of where the value comes in those early turns where the magic is disruptive. Beyond that, I guess the other takeaway is just about kill points. I've become pretty good at conserving points, and that's where the game is at. But I guess playing Lizardman, which hits hard first, it can't really win in the late game. You've got to come through, win a flank, hide some stuff away so that they can't take the points off you at the end. With Fly 10, Swift Stride, Light Cavalry, it's so much better with High Elves to be able to do that. I think in this instance, there's another layer here that I've learned that you have to just eradicate units. So poor Michael, Ruby rings 4 of my archers off the board. 1 survives. I'm able to run it around behind a house, never to be seen again, and save 37.5 points just from that. I'm not a fan of how that works, but I don't want to offer any suggestions at the moment, because a lot of people see the kill points nature of the game as opposed to scenario objectives as a big strength for playing Warhammer. And I don't really have anything beyond wild-eyed theory to know how changing the way games are won would affect other things. So my need to then chase down that unit of halberdiers until they were dead cost me a lot in other parts of the game, but I knew that if I wanted to get the sort of 400-ish points that were tied up in that unit, that I had to make sure even every model was killed in the end. And it's an interesting way of thinking about, as I used to think playing in, say, 4th Ed or beyond, that usually you just broke that first. Units used to just panic and run off the board for starters. Sometimes that panic would become contagious throughout other units and you'd win games before you started, which was never great. And you'd have sort of think you'd want to play again. On top of that, though, you'd want to, you usually hit a unit, break them, they'd flee, you'd run them down. And that was how the game was won. In this game, they fall back in good order, give ground. I think it's better, feels better. Still trying to articulate why that is. But if you want to get the points, you've got to massacre units. And I think that might distort the tournament game a little bit, or good play, where one of the reasons monsters might be great, or peg knights running around, is that they just destroy units wholesale. And, is there a lot of skill in doing that? I think there are skills within it, but I'm not sure it's someone who's sitting back there and thinking, I got massacred because that was the gap between our ability. And I wonder if that's where we should be pushing. Should we be pushing more of the narrative of the game? Are there just limitations in Warhammer that can't be overcome? And I'm still having the time of my life when I'm playing the game, especially tonight. Sorry, Michael. Every kick seems to be a goal, but it does feel a little bit like that some of these things are disjointed, and would be interested to see what people think. If you have any ideas about it, if you want to put it in the comments below. Starting to get a more nuanced view of how to win at Warhammer. Are kill points the future? Does this 25% rule doesn't make any sense? Should you gain points for standards? That's one of my reasons why you shouldn't take a Michael had a unit of knights with a musician and a champion, no standard bearer. I'm a big fan of that approach, but it makes the game much less aesthetically appealing. So if you've got any ideas, it'd be great if you wanted to put them below. Thanks for listening. It was a bit of a long one, but I'm at the start of my high elf journey, and like to analyze these things in great detail. If you have any tips, the Skycutter Mage list has been played to great success by a couple of different people in the SBot online tournament, and I think it's a fun alternative if you want to be able to play against dragons, but not necessarily have to bring one yourself. So thanks for watching. Any comments below? Happy to respond. Let us know what you think.